What is up and welcome back. We are your Colorado real estate family. Today we're going to be comparing two super popular cities within Colorado. We're talking about Fort Collins and Colorado Springs.
All right, so let's go ahead and start with the obvious things, and that's going to be distance from Denver. So if we're looking at Fort Collins, if you just like type it in, which any of us can do, I'm going to give you a little bit of insider thing after this, but it'll tell you it's going to be an hour and 5 minutes north to Fort Collins. You take I-25 directly up, you run into kind of Fort Collins on your west side, left side going north. If you are going from Denver down south to Colorado Springs, the same type of type in the system will tell you it'll be an hour and 7 minutes. This blew my mind, to be honest, because that's a 2-minute difference, but there is a lot that goes into that. If you're going to Colorado Springs, you're going to go south on I-25 and you're going to run into Colorado Springs, but majority of it is going to be on your left side, which is also the east side, with some of it trailing onto the west side. Now, I would say, do you think would you think those numbers are correct?
You wouldn't think so. I think it's mainly because we're like in the Denver Metro North, and so it seems like Colorado Springs is so much further away, and ultimately we're just closer to Fort Collins. But it is pretty centrally located, Denver is, to these two cities, which is crazy to think. I don't know if those travel times are really true.
I was going to say, the travel times are going to throw you off. If you're like, oh, cool, I can commute to Denver in an hour or in 7 minutes from Colorado Springs, I would not use that number, guys. I'm sorry.
Nope.
Colorado's grown too much for you to use that number. But if you're looking at the proximity of the two cities, I think it's pretty safe to say that they're pretty similar. Mm-hmm. The problem is going to be drive time. If you're going up north of Fort Collins, you're going to have a lot of traffic between, say, Spear around Denver, going up to about 84th on I-25. You're going to have kind of a nice, pretty good drive for a minute until you hit like the construction right before Loveland. Now, this construction is going to make a ginormous difference going from Denver to, say, Fort Collins. Yep. If you're going south, you're going to catch that traffic from Spear, and it's going to go, beyond the tech center, honestly, at this point.
I say right as you pass the tech center. So the tech center, pretty much you got a Cabela's on the west side of I-25. Right after that is when you start flowing again until you get into Castle Rock, and then you get a little bit more congestion.
Bit of slow down, and then you're pretty good.
Then south side of Castle Rock, it starts to free up a little bit, but then you hit that construction again. Both of these places have a lot of widening the highways in both areas, and so once that's done, it might be great, but as of right now, that road construction definitely does hinder that drive.
All right, we talked about kind of proximity to Denver, maybe a little bit of travel versus what it's saying as far as distance goes. Let's talk a little bit about another obvious one, which is going to be that population. So up in Fort Collins, population for 2024 is 359,000. Yeah. That's the 2024. If you're comparing it to Colorado Springs, it's going to be 701,000. So again, this is double the size from Colorado Springs to Fort Collins. Yep. That is fine, right? Like you could be like, cool, like Fort Collins is smaller than Colorado Springs. Let's talk a little bit about what that's going to look like moving forward. So I did find a really cool stat on macrotrends.com. It does talk about growth rates. It talks about, multiple years. It's a great reference if you want to go look a little deeper into this, but just pulling some statistics for you guys. What does that look like for these growing cities? Fort Collins' growth rate from just last year is at 1.41%. But what does that look like in the future? This also has a very cool statistic on it that shows you to 2035. 2035 in Fort Collins is showing that 0.76% increase, which will bring you up to a population by 2035 of 399,000. Yeah. Let's take that same comparison down to Colorado Springs. So comparing from this last year, the growth rate is 1.15%, so smaller than Fort Collins. Yep. However, if you are looking into the 2035 growth rate, it's going to be 0.9%, which is actually higher than Fort Collins, bringing it into an approximate population of 776,000 people. Yep. That is great numbers. So it shows obviously that we've had a larger growth in Fort Collins over the last year, but Colorado Springs is projected to have a higher growth rate between now and 2035. In fact, tell them kind of like our...
Yeah, we've mentioned this a few times before, how there's an article out there right now talking about how by 2050, Colorado Springs will be the most populous city within Colorado, overtaking Denver. Colorado Springs is growing like crazy. Right now, it is the second largest city in Colorado, and it just keeps on growing and growing, guys. So we'll sum this up towards the end, which one we think that you would like, depending on what you're looking for. So make sure you stick around to the end, because we're going to be talking about this, and the fact that the city is becoming so large might take a huge part in that decision. All right, now that we got over all those statistics, let's go ahead and go over a cost of living comparison. And actually, this kind of, it surprised me a little bit reading these numbers. Colorado Springs, it always was like a lot cheaper than Denver as we were growing up as kids. Same as Fort Collins, but the numbers are showing that Colorado Springs is still a little bit cheaper as compared to Fort Collins in a few areas. So let's just go over your overall. What we like to do is your cost of living index, where 100 is your national average. It's above that, then it's more expensive than your national average. I cannot talk today. If it's cheaper than that, or if it's lower than that, then it's cheaper than your national average. So overall, what we're looking at for Fort Collins is a 115.7, more expensive than your national average. And then Colorado Springs is a 110.3, more expensive, but still cheaper than your Fort Collins national average. So it's interesting to see that. Let's break these numbers down a little bit though. If we are looking at that food and groceries, Fort Collins is going to be at a 101.1, just a little bit more than your national average, where Colorado Springs is coming in right a little bit over 98, so a little bit cheaper when we are talking about that food and groceries. Healthcare. Now, when we talk about health costs in Colorado, mainly the Denver metro area, it is always so much lower than your national average. If we look up in Fort Collins, it's actually 87.2, and if we go down to Colorado Springs, it's at 82.6, so still cheaper when we are talking about the healthcare down in Colorado Springs compared to Fort Collins. And housing is another big expense. Now, when we are talking about this number with housing, we are talking about the cost to purchase and also rent a house, attached, condo, townhouse, doesn't all those lumped into one sum. Your number, when we're talking about that cost of living index up in Fort Collins, is a 167.2. If we go down into Colorado Springs, it's a 140.9. So far, Colorado Springs is still cheaper than Fort Collins. There is one part that Fort Collins did take the crown though when we are talking about this cost of living, and that is going to be your utilities. Utilities cost of living index is going to be a 91.3 up in Fort Collins, where if we look down in Colorado Springs, it's going to be a 92.4. So a little bit cheaper when we are talking about those utilities up in Fort Collins as compared to Colorado Springs. The question is, will these numbers hold? As Colorado Springs begins to grow more and more, are those prices going to be going up? Because we know that Colorado Springs is one of the top locations that so many people are relocating into. This is what happened to Denver. Denver was so much cheaper to big cities, to larger cities like LA. And so everyone started coming into Denver, and that's where our housing prices really started to skyrocket. So will we see that same thing down in Colorado Springs as more people who are relocating into Colorado are moving down there? Last but not least, we always talk about that median sales price. This number is going to be your attached and your detached lumped into one number. The median sales price up in Fort Collins is $570,000, and that is up just a little over 6%. To be exact, 6.29%. These numbers are as of February of 2024. If we go down into Colorado Springs, you got a median sales price as of February of 2024 of $439,000. Year over year, that number is up 3.29%. It's actually, I'm kind of glad to see that Fort Collins is going up a little bit, because towards the end of 2023, we were seeing that it was in the negative quite a bit. So it's good to see that the growth is coming back a little bit more to Fort Collins. We know that, I think it was Best Living or one of the living sites, blogs, or whatever. It was it's the best lifestyle or best place to live based on lifestyle back in, I think it's 2020, 2021, right around there. Fort Collins blew up, and then it just had this little slump where it started going down. Not too many people were moving there. But it's great to see that the numbers are starting to pop up a little bit more again.
All right, let's talk a little bit about that culture and that community scene.
Yep.
I looked up a lot of different things because, of course, we have our own opinions, which I will give you as well. But I thought it was really fascinating to see what each city felt about what culture they're trying to cultivate there. And so I did pull up some of the stuff on the website because I thought it was really interesting. I do think it actually does a pretty good job. So I'm going to read it to you here. It says, by the website, enthusiasm for health. Okay, I'm sorry. This is Fort Collins. Ready?
Yep.
Enthusiasm for health and the outdoors, strong education system, extensive park and open space, and the flourishing downtown district. So that's really wordy, right? But I do think it hits it pretty much spot on. At Fort Collins, you are going to have the ultimate outdoor enthusiasts, the people who don't want to live in Boulder. They want a smaller town, but they are still nestled up next to Horsetooth, so they still get that lake, the kind of foothill type living. And they also, there's biking is huge. They can still do all of the water sports the boating, paddleboarding, things like that. So I do think that hits it right on. As far as the open spaces and parks, I do think they do a good job on making sure there's a lot of trail systems. There's everywhere you go within Fort Collins. Even if you go downtown and you go into the city of Fort Collins, learn about it, they do have trail system pamphlets and everything to really try to get involved. The other thing that you're going to feel as far as culture is this brewery lifestyle. Now, I am not I do not think that everyone understands that that is a very cultural thing. Like, as far as people, when you say brewery and like all the options for that, it does have this like play hard during the day and do all of these outdoor enthusiast activities, but then also like a very chill, outgoing. It's funny that like breweries like represent this like chill out style, like outgoing lifestyle. But anyway, so that is another part of the culture, is that play hard during the day and then also like be able to go and like hang out with the community in a community style living.
Well, I think that like this whole brewery thing too is really known up in kind of your Denver Metro North up to Fort Collins.
Yeah.
Without basing off any stats, just living here as a local, as a native and all that stuff, you always think if you want to do that brewery hopping type stuff without having to go downtown, you usually go to northern Colorado when we're talking about Longmont, Loveland, Fort Collins. These are the areas that we are always talking about. Colorado Springs, you really don't think about that. You don't think I'm going to go hit all the breweries down in Colorado Springs. It just doesn't have that same vibe as Fort Collins would.
Yeah, so let's talk about that with Colorado Springs. What is Colorado Springs kind of trying to like create in culture?
Yeah.
I was having a harder time finding this. Like, it is so spelled out in Fort Collins website what they are trying to be known for. Mm-hmm. Down in Colorado Springs, everything that I looked at, from incentives, from the city website, everything that I can find, they really said that their city culture is associated with places and attractions. And I think that's so... It's definitely not as wordy and pretty, right? As far as like Fort Collins stating what their culture is, but it is so true with all the different things. We'll cover some of those things a little later on. The other thing that they don't say in there that I think is really important for you to understand from a local's perspective is Colorado Springs has always been kind of known as your heavy military area. It's going to be, should I say religious or just like Christian? Like, there's a lot of...
Yeah, it's always been known as kind of your spiritual area, I guess. You know, so we always know that.
Spiritual. It is pretty religious.
It is pretty religious, or it has been in the past. It's kind of changed a little bit, but I mean, with that heavy military population that is down there,
that has been the history of it, and that's what it's been known for. So I think it's important to understand. Obviously, they're not going to say that on the website. I think they were afraid maybe that might deter people from coming in because Colorado as a whole is very mixed, but it has been one of those areas, and if we don't talk about it, you won't know. So that is something that has been there. We do see that changing a little bit. All right, since we're on that topic and we are so done from shying away from things, we're ready to jump into a little bit of how that stands politically, because I think that is one of the big differences between these two cities. If you look down, we'll just use statistics from Politico.com on the last 2020 election and just like show you the statistics and move on. Down with El Paso County in Colorado Springs, they voted 53.5% for Trump in 2020 election, and then they voted 42.7% for Biden. If you take that same exact resource of Politico.com and you look up to Larimer County, which is going to be including Fort Collins, that is going to be 56.2% Biden and 40.8% Trump. So as you can see, it is a flip-flop for both of those cities and a very big deciding factor. Some people have asked us, we like to use Politico.com if you're trying to compare certain counties, but that is a good statistic to kind of show you the differences in the two.
All right, the next thing that we do want to compare is pretty much your job market or your opportunities that you do have in each of these cities. Of course, so what I essentially did, because if you look up the largest employers in each of the cities, most of them are going to be, you know, your public resources, the cities, down in Colorado Springs, a lot of the military employs quite a bit. So instead of doing that, I actually looked at the top employers or the best employers in each of these cities, all according to Zippia.com. So I'm going to have to read these off because I cannot remember all these guys, but let's just go over Fort Collins first, and then we'll hop over to Colorado Springs. I took the top 4 best places to work in each of these cities. So if we are looking at Fort Collins, you're looking at Woodward, which is aerospace and industrial central solutions, pretty much, or control solutions. But bear with me, like I said, I just pretty much took them all as they said on the website. Number 2 is Tolmore Inc., which is a pharmaceutical company. If we look at number 3, you got Boyd Group Services, which is entrepreneur strategists, pretty much. They help out entrepreneurs. It looked like it was like helping them out, kind of plan for the future and all that stuff. And then number 4 will be BillGo, which is pretty much a bill payment processor. That's going to be up in Fort Collins. Now, if we look at the best employers down in Colorado Springs, you've got Valdez International, which is IT solutions and services. Number 2 is Compassion, and we actually have family that works at Compassion. They always talk about it. This is a Christian-based nonprofit. You got number 3, which is Spectranetics. Spectranetics, which is a cardiac specialist pretty much. And then number 4 is Vectrus, which is communication. and network security. So those are your top best employers according to Zippia.com in each of these areas. Another quick thing that I did want to know between these two areas is they both are technically college towns. So you have CSU, Colorado State University up in Fort Collins, and then you have Colorado Christian University, and then CU, Colorado Springs, down in Colorado Springs. So just something to note. But then if you go up into Fort Collins, they definitely feel like they embrace that college lifestyle a lot more in Fort Collins as compared to Colorado Springs.
All right, now say you have kiddos that are not in college and you're looking at some of those other schools. Let's talk about those school districts. This is kind of a big difference. When I looked at Colorado Springs, there are 3 major school districts. I'll cover all 3 of them, whereas Fort Collins has 1 major school district. So that is good that you would have multiple choices in Colorado Springs when it comes to school districts, but you're not going to really have to go that far because both are showing pretty high statistics. So let's talk about it. The first one down in Colorado Springs is Academy School District number 20, which is rated an A according to niche.com. We also have Manitou Springs School District, which is a B+, and then we have Cheyenne Mountain School District number 12, which is an A+. If you go up to Fort Collins, you have Poudre School District, and that is rating in at an A. So I don't think you're really going to go wrong when it comes to schools in these 2 cities because they do, even though Colorado Springs has more districts and more options in that way, overall, Fort Collins, the school district, is rated an A overall. So I don't really think it's going to be something that you're going to have to battle with as much, or might not be the hardest decision when trying to choose.
And when we talk about these schools, guys, we always recommend going in on the map. If you are kind of narrowing in on an area that you want to live in, make sure you go to niche.com and that map on the left side of the screen. So I'm trying to think. It's
I know,
mirrored,
I guess everything's backwards. So it's on the side.
Yeah, and you go into the map and it's like, all right, cool. I love this neighborhood in this area or whatever it might be. And you can really get an idea of what the schools are like in there. Of course, these grades, are all based off of different things. It doesn't mean that the school's horrible if it's rated lower in one way or another. I mean, but it gives you a good idea kind of where that school rates in academics, sports, like all these different topics.
It even has diversity. And
Diversity
has
all this stuff, yep. All right, and the final thing that we're going to cover before giving you a summary as locals, as natives of Colorado, is pretty much your outdoor and recreation. We already kind of talked about this a little bit, but I just kind of want to sum it up. If you could sum it up into like one word or one little sentence into each area. And so like Colorado Springs, growing up, it was always the epitome of that Jeep lifestyle, right? Where you go down there, people have their Jeeps all lifted, all super awesome looking and everything. They all have these trails they could go to, whether it be Rampart Range or the outside of Manitou. They have all these different trails. Or if you were up in Fort Collins, it's more that boating bros style where everyone's got a boat, where it doesn't matter whether you're going up to Horsetooth, down to Carter, you got Boyd Lake, you got all these reservoirs that so many people go to with their boats. And it's a huge thing out there. It seems like everyone in Fort Collins has a boat. Well, more on the outskirts of downtown. Like downtown, you won't see too many boats because they want to take more advantage of the downtown Fort Collins area and all the festivities that they have there. And that actually kind of segues into the next thing with outdoor activities. When we talked about is the huge brewery scene that they have in downtown Fort Collins, but then also that downtown. They have all these festivities and everything that's great in that small little quaint downtown. You compare that to Colorado Springs, it's a larger downtown and it's not as quaint. It's only going to grow with more people that are moving down to Colorado Springs. Colorado Springs is spread out over a ton of land. It's going to grow more and more as the years go on. And so that might be one of the big considerations when we are talking about which place to really choose. Are you looking more for that small town feel or that large town, big city feel? And then the last thing with this outdoor activities and everything is, of course, you do have, the Air Force Academy, you have Fort Carson and all that stuff down in Colorado Springs. A lot of that is incorporated in the outdoor stuff. And so, at the Air Force, we used to always go down there for the football games. It was awesome. You're always hearing kind of jets flying over and all that stuff. And it's pretty cool being in that military vibe. And then Peterson, it used to be Peterson Air Force Base. Now it's Peterson Space Force Base, which is pretty cool to say. I looked it up. I was like, am I reading that right? Or is that a Google glitch or what? And so like up in Fort Collins, as we already mentioned, it's more of your small town vibe. So now I think it's good to kind of dive in and see which one you think might be good for you. We've talked about this whole time. Like it's pretty much comparing small town to big city lifestyle. Although Colorado Springs isn't as big city as Denver is right now, it's only going to keep on growing more and more. And so it's just choosing whether we want to be into a larger city where it's a little bit more spread out, or somewhere that's more small town, more quaint, and kind of that more, it feels like more of a community vibe.
I also personally, living there, I don't know why I feel like Fort Collins just feels so much closer to Denver. I feel like that commute just seems less cumbersome. So that was something that I personally liked when we were looking kind of do we go south? Because we kind of grew up west, really, right? West Arvada is where we kind of grew up. And when we decided to go north or south, like that was part of the reason that we pulled, is because we did like going to Fort Collins and Longmont and Loveland to enjoy some of those festivities.
Yep.
And so we ended up in the middle. But I do feel like for some reason, and maybe it's just bias, it just feels like less cumbersome to go north than it is going south. And again, that could just be all personal opinion.
And there's actually one other thing that I didn't consider in this whole thing, the airports. So yes, they both have their regional airports, but if you want access into DIA, you are going to want to choose Fort Collins because you have a quicker commute over to Denver International Airport as opposed to Colorado Springs. It's going to take you a heck of a lot longer because you're pretty much coming from the Denver Metro South, and where Fort Collins is closer to Denver Metro North, where that airport is. You have E470 that takes you directly there, so a lot quicker trip over to DIA from Fort Collins as opposed to Colorado Springs. All right, cool guys. Thank you so much. These are two super popular cities that you guys are always bringing up when we do talk to you on the phone. If you are looking at purchasing real estate in the state of Colorado, give us a call or text that phone number right below. Right there, we have assembled the best team to help you out with all your real estate needs.
And if you're not ready to buy, no worries. Hit that subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video, and also hit that notification bell. We are covering different cities based on requests and also just preference or what we're seeing in trends, so you're not going to want to miss it. Hit that subscribe button so you're notified every time we put out a new video.
All right, guys. Until next time, we love you. Bye.
Bye.